More than 300 people arrested in Hong Kong as the new national security law takes effect.
I think mostly it's a feeling of helplessness.
Thousands took to the streets this morning on the 23rd anniversary of Britain's handover of Hong Kong to China. Police were out in force, firing water cannons, tear gas, and pepper spray at protesters. At least one protester carried a Hong Kong independence flag. The new law makes subversive or secessionist activity punishable by up to life in prison. And in Washington, Hong Kong supporters held a prayer vigil outside of the U.S. Capitol.
We stand in solidarity and call for America and the Trump administration to stand with Hong Kong.
The group of evangelical leaders and human rights activists knelt in front of the Capitol praying for basic rights and freedoms to be restored to the people of Hong Kong. Joining me now on Skype with his analysis is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, welcome back to the show. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Well, Gordon, a lot of people are saying this new security law signals the end of the one country, two systems framework. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's certainly a correct assessment because this national security law allows Beijing to do whatever it wants in Hong Kong. For instance, it sets up an office for safeguarding national security. That office is not subject to Hong Kong law. It's not even subject to mainland law, and it can actually determine its own jurisdiction. So essentially, it's above the law. And when you look at the provisions of this act, it really means that Hong Kong is no longer enforcing its laws.
Yeah, and I know the law's passage instantly raised concerns that it would be used to silence members of the opposition. And while some opposition groups did disband their social media presence, many people were still out protesting today. Do you think there'll be continued resistance, or do you think people will essentially just go silent?
I think people may go silent at first. Actually, I was surprised at the number of people who showed up on this July 1. You know, July 1 is a significant date for Hong Kong because it marked the 23rd anniversary of the handover. And ever since 1997, there's been a July 1 march for democracy. This is the first year that the authorities didn't get permission for it. And so therefore, I thought that people would have been intimidated, but obviously they weren't. Now, long term, I don't think we're going to see the 2 million people out on the streets as we did in June of last year. But nonetheless, I think that there is going to be important demonstrations. And Beijing has basically got a long-term struggle on its hands because this is an insurgency. Insurgencies can melt away for times, but they always come back.
Well, Gordon, as you know, anyone found guilty of secession or subversion or terrorism and collusion with foreign powers can now be sentenced to life in prison. Can you give us some examples of some of the so-called crimes?
Well, I'll give you an example right now. So, for instance, I believe the people of Hong Kong should have the right to determine their own future. That statement by itself is a crime under Article 38 of the law because it criminalizes foreign acts outside of Hong Kong. And obviously, the Chinese authorities would feel that that would be secession. So clearly, we're talking about a number of acts, not only in Hong Kong, but elsewhere. This is going to have a chilling effect on what people say and what people do. And unfortunately, this is the way China decided to treat Hong Kong.
Well, the Trump administration placed new restrictions on U.S. exports of defense equipment and certain high-technology products going to Hong Kong. What do you make of the U.S.'s response so far, and do you think that more should be done?
First of all, I think that the steps that the Trump administration has already taken are the right ones. There's more that can be done. So, for instance, there is legislation in Congress that would give the Treasury the right to punish Chinese banks that maintained accounts with officials who were undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. There's a lot the United States can do. And we got to remember that our disagreements with China extend well beyond what it's doing in Hong Kong. So whatever we do on those other issues, I think is going to have an effect. And this is going to be a long-term struggle with China because China is challenging not just the United States, but its neighbors and the rest of the international community.
Well, Gordon, thank you so much for coming on. We always really appreciate your input. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.